Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the biggest ideas shaping our world. Today, we're charting a course into the pretty complex world of sustainable fishing economics. It's a huge global issue, right? It affects everything from, tiny coastal villages to global food supplies.
Absolutely. And our source material for this deep dive is a really key paper. It's called The Future of Wild-Caught Fisheries, Expanding the Scope of Management. The lead author is Kroetz with Linda Nøstbakken and Martin Quaas.
Okay, so what's the big idea here? What are they arguing?
Well, the central argument really is that our traditional way of managing fisheries is just too narrow. Typically we focus on counting like one fish species in one specific area. They're saying, look, if we actually want to solve the deep problems, we have to zoom out, way out.
Right. So our mission today is kind of to map out all these other factors, these market failures they identify that go beyond just too many boats chasing too few fish.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond just, keeping the fish stock okay to thinking about the whole system,
Yeah.
maximizing economic benefits, social benefits. It's all part of what people are now calling ecosystem-based fisheries management, or EBFM.
EBFM. Got it. Okay, so before we jump into that bigger picture, maybe let's anchor ourselves. What was that classic problem, the textbook one fisheries managers were wrestling with for like decades?
Yeah, the classic problem is the tragedy of the commons. Gordon wrote about it way back in the 50s. Basically, if you have a shared resource like fish in the ocean and no one really owns it or controls access, everyone rushes in to get what they can before the next person does. Overexploitation. Too many boats. Too few fish. Simple as that, almost.
And that leads to specific economic problems, right?
Hmm.
Not just fewer fish.
Oh, yeah. Two big ones that economists have studied forever. First, you have stock externalities. So when I catch a fish, there's one less fish for you to catch.
Yeah.
Seems obvious. But it means my fishing makes your fishing more expensive, more difficult. And second, congestion externalities. Just, too many boats bumping into each other, getting in each other's way. It literally drives up the costs of operating.
Okay, so that's the problem. What was the go-to solution that economists championed?
The big one was market-based policies, specifically catch shares. You probably know them as ITQs, individual transferable quotas. Essentially, you're turning that open access resource into something more like private property. You give each fisher a right to a specific percentage of the total allowed catch.
And the idea is that stops the race.
Exactly. If you own your share, you don't need to race out on day one. You can plan. Fish when the weather's good, when the market price is high. It massively boosts economic efficiency.
And we know this works, right? There are clear benefits. Profitability goes up because they can, like you said, time the market. I've even read studies showing it makes fishing safer.
Totally. Fewer risks taken when you're not desperately trying to beat the clock or other boats. The efficiency gains are pretty undeniable. And this is where the paper really kicks off its main argument. The rollout of new cash share programs has actually slowed way down recently.
Wait, why? If they're so good economically, why the slowdown?
Because a huge pushback, opposition, especially from coastal communities.
Huh. Communities that rely on fishing are pushing back against policies that make fishing more profitable. That seems counterintuitive.
It does on the surface, yeah. But it's because that pure economic efficiency often clashes with other things people value, like equity or just the survival of their town. See, catch shares often lead to consolidation. Bigger companies or wealthier individuals can buy up the quota from smaller local fishers.
Ah, okay, so the quota leaves the community.
Right. And that means fewer local jobs. And it can trigger these threshold effects, like maybe there aren't enough local boats bringing fish in anymore to keep the local processing plant viable, so the plant shuts down.
Wow, and then the whole local fishing economy can just unravel, even if the fishery overall, nationally, is making more money.
Precisely. So the traditional fix solved one problem, the race to fish, but it kind of created or highlighted another,
Yeah.
the social disruption, the equity problem. And that failure really sets the stage for needing this broader management scope the paper talks about.
Makes perfect sense. So let's dive into that broader scope. The paper groups these failures. Where do we start? Maybe with the ones inside the fishing sector itself, the endogenous ones.
Good place to start. Yeah, the first internal issue they flag is multi-species catch. Think about it.
Sure.
Nets don't just catch the one fish you're targeting. You always get bycatch other species caught unintentionally. Sometimes it's charismatic stuff like dolphins or turtles, which gets headlines, but often it's just other less valuable fish species. Either way, it's an ecological impact, a negative externality.
So even if you manage the main target species well, you could still be harming the ecosystem through bycatch.
Exactly. And even when fisheries try to manage multiple target species together, they mention the Norwegian cod, haddock, and saithe fishery. As an example, it's complex. A rule you set for cod might have unexpected ripple effects on the haddock catch or the market for saithe. Single species thinking still kind of creeps in.
Okay, what's the next internal challenge?
The second is dealing with separate regulation of the same stock. This happens all the time. You might have commercial boats and recreational anglers going after the same fish, or maybe different types of commercial boats using different gear. When the government sets a total limit, the TAC, total allowable catch, how do you split that pie?
Ah, the allocation fight. Sounds political.
It often is. And if that allocation isn't done efficiently, if you give too much quota to a less efficient fleet, for instance, you've created a market failure right there, even if the total catch level is sustainable biologically.
Gotcha. And the third internal issue. This sounds like a big one for EBFM, ecosystem connections.
Yeah, ecosystem interconnections. Specifically, they highlight something called cross-fishery participation spillovers. This is really interesting.
Spillover effects.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Okay, imagine fishery A puts in those ITQs we talked about. It becomes super efficient, maybe highly specialized. Some smaller boats or less efficient operators might get squeezed out, right? They sell their quota.
Makes sense. Consolidation happens.
Right. But where do those displaced fishers and their boats go? Often, they just move their effort over to fishery B next door, which doesn't have strict quotas yet.
Oh, I see. You fix the problem in one place, but you just push the pressure somewhere else.
Exactly. So fishery A looks great on paper, super efficient. But you've just intensified the race to fish in fishery B, maybe making its problems worse, potentially harming its stock. The overall economic health of the whole region might actually go down.
Because the management scope was just focused on fishery A in isolation?
Precisely. Didn't count for that movement of people and boats between fisheries.
Okay, that covers the internal stuff. But the paper stresses that fisheries don't exist in a vacuum, right? There are huge forces coming from outside the sector, these exogenous failures.
Yet the outside pressures are massive and growing. The paper really zeroes in on four big ones. Changes in how we use the ocean space, the seascape, climate change, pollution, and invasive species.
Let's take seascape use first. That feels very current. We're talking shipping lanes, offshore wind farms.
Mariculture, fish farming in the ocean.
Yeah.
All competing for space that fishers might have traditionally used. Global shipping traffic is way up. Offshore wind is expanding like crazy.
And the market failure here is?
We don't really have markets for ocean space like we do for land. You can buy and sell land, right? Yeah. But allocating ocean space is often done through like government planning or permits, which might not be the most efficient way to decide who gets to use what area. How do you balance fishing grounds against a new wind farm or a protected area? It requires integrated planning we're only starting to figure out.
Okay, then the really big one. Climate change. The paper mentions fish stocks are literally moving.
Yeah, it's a huge disruptor. Fish are chasing their preferred water temperatures. Generally, that means moving towards the poles, higher latitudes, and into deeper water.
And that has real, measurable economic consequences, not just ecological ones.
Oh, absolutely devastating ones. They cite a study by Moore and others from 2021, just looking at 16 major U.S. fisheries. The estimated loss in consumer surplus is basically the value people get from consuming that fish due to climate change. It was projected to be between $2 and $4 billion US dollars in present value.
Wow, 2 to 4 billion just for 16 fisheries in one country. That's staggering.
It really is. And the management failure is crystal clear. What happens when a fish stock swims out of country A's waters and into country B's?
The whole management system breaks down, I guess. Who sets the quota then?
Exactly. It can lead to conflict or just unregulated fishing. And think about the social impact, especially on smaller scale fishers, maybe in tropical regions. If the fish they depend on move hundreds of miles north, they often don't have the resources, the bigger boats, the capital to follow them. They just lose their livelihood.
Right. Okay, moving on. Pollution. The classic example is agricultural runoff.
Yeah, nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus washing off farms, flowing down rivers into the ocean. That causes eutrophication, basically over-fertilizing the water.
Leading to those dead zones, low oxygen areas.
Precisely, hypoxic zones. And that's a direct negative externality from farming dumped right onto the fishing industry. It stunts fish growth. The paper even mentions research showing low oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico actually changes the relative price of shrimp. Large shrimp become more expensive compared to small ones because the pollution makes it harder for them to grow big.
Fascinating. So pollution affects not just the quantity, but the quality and size of the catch.
Definitely. And conversely, the authors make a nice point. Some fisheries provide a positive externality. Think about shellfish, like mussels or oysters. They filter huge amounts of water as they feed.
The clean water.
Yeah, they provide an ecosystem service.
Yeah.
Ideally, management should somehow account for that benefit, maybe even incentivize those kinds of fisheries.
Okay, and the last exogenous factor was invasive species.
Right. Humans move species around, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately.
Mm.
This can be ecologically disastrous. They mentioned jellyfish taking over parts of the Black Sea. But sometimes, surprisingly, it can create a new economic opportunity, like the incredibly profitable king crab fishery that established itself in Norwegian and Russian waters after introduction. It's complex.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything. Okay, so we've covered internal failures, external pressures. What about the issues that cut across everything? The paper mentions data, traceability, and that equity challenge we touched on earlier.
Yeah, these are cross-cutting problems. Let's start with data, or rather, the under-provision of public data. We're generating tons more data now, right? Satellites watching the oceans, sensors on boats, mobile tech. But data often acts like a public good once it's collected. Many people could benefit from it. Yet it's often held tightly by governments or private companies.
And if data isn't shared effectively?
Then you get suboptimal decisions. Managers don't have the full picture. Fishers might not know the best places or times to fish efficiently. This is especially a problem in developing countries with less capacity to gather and analyze data. Better data sharing could unlock a lot of value.
Which ties directly into the next point, doesn't it? Information sharing and traceability along the whole supply chain.
Absolutely. This is all about knowing where your fish came from. Lack of information makes it easy for bad actors to thrive. We're talking illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing. Or fish being mislabeled, selling you cheap stuff as something premium.
Huge market failures enabled by poor information flow.
Exactly. So the solution everyone's moving towards is end-to-end traceability. Knowing the fish's journey from the net to your plate. Technologies like blockchain are being explored for this.
Blockchain for fish.
Yeah, creating an immutable digital record. But the thing is, it's currently quite expensive to implement. So right now, you mostly see it for really high-value fish like bluefin tuna. It's much harder economically to justify tagging every single anchovy or sardine. Big gap there still.
Right. Okay, and finally, let's circle back to that really thorny issue, the equity-efficiency trade-off.
This is maybe the toughest nut to crack. As we discussed, policies like ITQs are designed primarily for economic efficiency, maximizing the profit, the resource rent, from the fishery.
But society often cares about more than just profit. Jobs, community stability.
Exactly. Social sustainability. And the market failure here, linked to those catch shares, is that consolidation process. When quota gets bought up and moves away from coastal communities, those communities suffer, even if the overall fishery is richer. The people who value keeping fishing local often don't have the market power to outbid the big players for quota.
So how do managers balance this? Can you have efficiency and equity? Or do you always have to choose? The paper must offer some ways forward.
It does. It outlines two main policy approaches to try and manage this trade-off. Option one is basically building in safeguards.
Like rules on who can buy quota?
Sort of. For example, Norway puts restrictions on trading quota between different regions or between boats of different sizes.
Yeah.
The explicit goal is to keep fishing activity spread out along the coast, even if that means the fishery isn't maximally efficient in a pure economic sense. They're choosing to sacrifice some potential profit for social goals.
Okay, so that's embedding equity directly into the rules. What's the second option? You mentioned taxes earlier.
Right. Option two is let the market work efficiently first, generate those big profits, but then tax the resource rent, that pure profit, and redistribute it.
So use taxes to compensate those who might have lost out from the efficiency drive.
Exactly. Iceland has a fishing fee that works something like this. The key insight the paper stresses, which is important for non-economists, is that taxing this resource rent can be done in a way that's non-distortionary.
Non-distortionary, meaning it doesn't mess up the incentives too much.
Pretty much. Think about it. If you tax labor, like put a tax on hiring crew members, you give boat owners an incentive to hire fewer people, maybe use more machines, that changes their behavior, distorts the market away from the efficient outcome.
Okay.
But if you tax the resource rent, the extra profit that exists simply because the fish are valuable and access is limited, you're taxing a surplus. It doesn't really change the owner's decision about whether to fish or how many crew to hire, because the profit is still there to be made after covering all costs. You're just redirecting some of that windfall profit.
Ah, I see. So it's a way to capture some of the value for broader social benefit without undermining the efficiency gains that generated the value in the first place.
That's the idea. It's seen as a more economically neutral way to fund equity programs compared to, say, restricting trade directly.
That's really clear.
Yeah.
Okay, wrapping this all together, the authors are calling for a much, much broader view of fisheries management. What are the key takeaways or priorities they recommend for policy and future research?
They boil it down to about three main areas. First, embrace that comprehensive approach and explicitly include equity. Social goals aren't an afterthought. They need to be integrated right alongside economic and ecological ones. And we need to think bigger. How do fisheries fit into the whole sustainable food system alongside agriculture?
Right. Break down those silos. What's second?
Second is technology and data. Keep pushing for better tech, cheaper sensors, better satellites, more computing power, and crucially, figure out ways to improve data sharing and access. This is vital for better monitoring and enforcement, especially, they note, in developing countries where resources are tighter.
Makes sense. Better information enables better management across the board. And the third priority?
The third is about being realistic about EBFM, the cost-benefit analysis. Everyone agrees ecosystem-based fisheries management is conceptually the right way to go. It addresses all these interconnected failures we've been talking about,
No.
but it's really expensive and complicated to implement. You need vast amounts of data, complex ecological and economic models. It's a heavy lift.
So the research needs to ask, when is the added complexity and cost actually worth it?
Exactly. We need rigorous analysis weighing the costs of EBFM against its expected benefits, especially when you're dealing with huge uncertainties, like how exactly climate change will shift stocks.
But they're optimistic that tech will help here.
Yeah, they do stress that technology is constantly getting better and cheaper. Things that seemed impossible a decade ago, like detailed ocean monitoring, are becoming feasible. So the cost-benefit calculation for EDFM is likely to keep improving over time, potentially opening the door for more sophisticated management down the road.
Okay, so this deep dive really took us on a journey. We started with that simple race to fish idea
Yeah, the tragedy of the commons.
and ended up navigating bycatch climate change impacts measured in billions, battles over ocean space with wind farms, illegal fishing, and this fundamental tension between making fisheries profitable and keeping coastal communities alive. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. The scope is just so much wider than we used to think.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. The paper hints at something really pragmatic about policymaking, because getting these complex, perfect policies through the political process can take forever or never happen.
Right, the political hurdles can be immense.
They suggest that sometimes maybe implementing a less economically perfect but politically achievable policy sooner might actually be better overall than waiting years for an ideal solution that never materializes. You have to factor in the cost of delay, the cost of continued mismanagement while you wait.
That's a really interesting point about the political economy of it all.
So the question for you is, how often do we see this trade-off in other areas of environmental management? And do we ever really properly account for the enormous economic and ecological costs of just waiting? Something to think about.